I was 9 when they claimed me. 9 Terran years living a life that only looked ordinary. After that day, everything before it turned brittle in my mind. Like paper held too close to a flame. Whole weeks vanished. Faces blurred, but a few moments stayed sharp enough to cut. The first was a routine examination at the Schola Progenium. Crowded infirmary, antiseptic sting, the usual balked orders. A proctor pressed a thin silver lancet to my fingertip. A bead of blood. A brief bored glance at the reader. Then his expression changed. He didn't scold me, didn't praise me. He simply stared at the readout as if it had spoken. He left without a word and returned with 3 others. They looked at me the way quartermasters look at a crate that shouldn't exist on the manifest. By dawn, the Schola's usual brutes, drill abbots and instructors, were nowhere in sight. In their place came giants in crimson robes. Their hoods swallowed their faces. Their voices were low, measured, and impersonal. They didn't speak to me. They spoke about me, right in front of me, as if I were cargo being inspected. "Markers are pronounced," one murmured. Another set a hand on my shoulder. The pressure wasn't cruel, but it was absolute. An inhuman strength made polite by restraint. "Viable," he said. "A candidate." The word landed with a strange reverence, like prayer. I didn't cry. The Schola had scraped weakness out of me long ago, lesson by lesson, punishment by punishment. I walked between my crimson escorts with my chin up, because that was how we were trained to walk when the world was watching. And the world was watching. Halls fell silent as we passed. Orphans peered from doorways, half hidden like frightened animals. Some looked jealous. Some looked relieved it wasn't them. None dared speak. In my childish arrogance, I imagined it was an honor, some sacred recruitment, some glorious path only whispered about in sermons. I was wrong in the way only children can be wrong. Completely. They led me to a shuttle sleek as a blade, gilt in places that suggested wealth and authority. Its markings meant nothing to me. Inside were more crimson-robed attendants, and one figure that made the air itself feel heavier. A giant in auramite, a custodian. Even at 9, I knew what he was. Every Imperial child is taught the proper shape of awe. Golden Guardian, Emperor's own, a living icon made flesh. He stood without helmet, his face severe and ageless, not so much old as finished, like something carved from the same substance as his armor. He looked at me once, a single measured glance, a fractional nod. Then he turned away as if the matter was settled. We lifted off-world in silence. Through the viewport, I watched the hive sprawl shrink into geometry. Towers and smoke and the faint, crawling lights of traffic becoming a dull pattern on the curve of the planet. In my lessons, I had imagined battlefields and banners and purpose. I had imagined that the Imperium offered straight roads to glory for the faithful. All those childish possibilities drained into the void as our destination grew nearer. Not the pilgrim routes, not the public processional ways where crowds might glimpse splendor from a safe distance. We descended into a place that had no audience, a hidden port cut into stone like a wound in a mountainside. The shuttle slid into it and vanished as if swallowed. When the ramp lowered, the air that hit me was cold, sterile, and thick with incense. Incense used not for comfort, but for control. Beneath it lurked a sharper scent, metal and something medicinal that made my skin tighten. "This way," one robed figure said. It was the first time any of them addressed me directly, and it chilled me more than the air. I hurried to keep pace, small steps chasing their long strides. We moved through corridors so vast the Schola's grand halls would have looked like storage closets. There were no decorations in the way a noble would mean them, no softness, no invitation, only scale and age and purpose. Stone and metal arranged in brutal harmony, preserved like a relic that still expected war. The ceiling soared beyond easy comprehension, supported by columns thick as hab blocks. The floor reflected us like black water. They brought me to a chamber where other boys waited, children like me. Some younger, some older, lined in rows with straight backs, hands at their sides, eyes forward. 20-some, I counted, though I stopped counting when the silence began to feel like pressure. No one told us we were forbidden to speak. We simply couldn't. Something about the place pinned sound inside the throat. Time stretched. Hours, perhaps more. A smaller boy trembled beside me until his knees began to fail. I stared at an inscription on the far wall in high Gothic that I couldn't fully parse and forced my mind to cling to the shapes of the letters, rather than to the gnawing fear growing behind my ribs. When the doors finally opened, it wasn't the crimson-robed attendants. It was 3 custodians. Their aura might caught the light and scattered it across our faces in warm, merciless flashes. Helmets off, their features were too symmetrical to be comforting. Beautiful in the same way statues are beautiful, without softness, without compromise. The one in the center spoke. "I am Shield Captain Arakan." His voice was deep, steady, and stripped of emotion. Not cruel, simply unconcerned. "You have been selected as candidates for an honor beyond measure. You will be tested, you will be remade. Most of you will fail." A pause, just long enough for the words to sink in. Those who fail will still serve. It was the way he said "still" that made my stomach go cold. "From this moment," Arakan continued, "you are not children, you are not names, you are material." He looked over us as if counting stones. Flawed marble is discarded. Only perfect stone becomes the statue. "Your first test begins now." He turned. "Follow. Do not speak. Do not fall behind." And then the 3 of them walked away, and we followed like a line of condemned souls trailing demigods. The palace's grandeur narrowed into utility. Corridors became identical. Right angles. Repeated turns. A precise labyrinth. The air grew thinner and colder. The lights dimmed, not into darkness, but into a kind of controlled gloom. We marched until my legs felt like iron poured into bone. The first boy fell hours in. Too young, too small, exhaustion winning in a single ugly moment. His feet tangled, his body folded, and he hit the floor with a sound that somehow felt loud in that silent place. No one stopped. We couldn't. Not because we lacked pity, but because terror is a leash, and it pulled our eyes forward. The custodians didn't break stride, didn't glance back. The boys' sobs faded behind us. A door opened somewhere. Then nothing. By the time I stopped measuring in hours and started measuring in heartbeats, more had fallen. 6, 7. My mouth went dry enough that swallowing hurt. My breath steamed in the air. We were not given water, not given food, not given explanation. I locked my gaze on the boy in front of me and matched him step for step, because the only thought I could afford was a single, stubborn refusal. Not me. When we finally stopped, we were fewer, roughly half. We stood in a circular chamber whose walls were lined with upright compartments. They resembled sleeping pods, but the resemblance was unkind. Sarcophagi, more than beds. Arakan faced us again. "You will sleep," he said. "When you wake, the next stage begins." Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly buckled. A panel hissed open at my nearest compartment. Inside was a hard surface, layered with a thin gel that looked like the skin of something dead. I lay down. The material yielded to my shape with cold intimacy. The panel sealed. Darkness swallowed me. I expected panic, claustrophobia, prayer. Instead, my thoughts slid away as if gently taken. Some agent, gas, injection I never saw, dragged me under. My last conscious question, dull and heavy, was simple. Where did they take the ones who fell? I woke to pain. Not the ache of fatigue, not the hollow burn of hunger. This pain was sharp, precise, and deliberate. The kind that has intent behind it. Light stabbed my eyes. Shapes moved above me. I tried to speak. No sound came. I tried to move. My limbs refused. I was awake inside a body that had become an object. A clinical voice spoke from somewhere out of sight. Neural activity elevated. Another, colder. Consciousness confirmed. Begin initial grafting. Pain response thresholds to follow. Something cold touched my arm. Then heat. Liquid fire, as if molten metal ran through my veins. Agony spread in waves, calculated and systematic. I would have screamed until my throat tore if I'd been allowed to scream. I would have fought until my bones snapped if my body had obeyed. But I remained perfectly still while the world became suffering. Time stopped being a straight line. It became intervals. Pain, then dim clarity, then pain again. During one brief lull, I understood I was on an operating slab. Medical servitors hovered around me, their mechanized limbs whispering and clicking. Above, lenses focused and refocused, recording everything, measured cruelty documented like scripture. Mapping complete, someone said. Compatibility exceeding projections. A third voice, lower, almost reverent. The Emperor's blood runs strong. I didn't understand what that meant. I only understood that it made them more committed, not more merciful. Proceed to augmentation phase 1. The pain changed character. Deeper, as if they were rewriting the blueprint beneath my skin. I felt alteration happening. Not enhancement layered on top, but something being erased and replaced, cell by cell. In my brief moments of childish comprehension, I tried to label it with the only myth I knew. They're making me an Astartes. Even then, some part of me sensed the lie in that thought. Space Marines were forged in vast numbers, a brutal industry of war. This was not industry. This was craftsmanship. When consciousness returned fully again, I was back inside the coffin pod. The pain had cooled to a steady throb that pulsed with my heartbeat, as if my body had learned a new rhythm. I discovered I could move. Slowly, carefully. Every motion sparked discomfort through nerves that felt different. I lifted a hand before my face. It took me a moment to accept it was mine. The fingers seemed longer, the joints subtly reshaped, the skin carrying a faint inner sheen like metal ground into flesh at a molecular level. I flexed, and the movement felt smoother than it should, like a machine designed well. The pod opened. I stepped out into the circular chamber. Others emerged too. Survivors moving with the tentative caution of strangers wearing stolen bodies. I counted again. We were fewer. Fewer by 4. Shield Captain Arakan waited at the center, and with him stood pale-robed figures wearing smooth masks without expression. They did not resemble ordinary Mechanicus, yet they moved with the same precise certainty as those who believe the universe is a system to be solved. The first threshold is complete, Arakan said. Some of your number were found wanting. He did not call them boys, did not call them dead. Their substance will serve the Emperor in other forms. The words were clean, the meaning was not. You remaining candidates will begin conditioning. Your bodies have been prepared. Now they will be tested. We were issued simple metal rods. I learned quickly they were not simple. Each strike delivered a biting energy discharge. Painful, controlled, non-lethal. The servitors we faced wielded their own rods with mechanical precision, hitting weak points we didn't know we had. This wasn't training the way the scholar trained. No instruction, no correction, no guidance. Only stress, only consequence. We fought for hours. When a boy collapsed, a robed figure dragged him away. Sometimes he returned, sometimes he didn't. My altered body took punishment that would have killed the child I used to be. I learned to predict the servitors' patterns, to answer their rigid perfection with adaptability. I learned that pain could be made into fuel if you stopped pleading with it to end. Cycle after cycle, the routine became existence. Wake, fight, endure. Return to the pods. Change, repeat. The pods were not rest. They were continuation. Each emergence brought subtle differences. Muscle density, reflex speed, bone reinforcement, resilience that felt less like growth and more like replacement. My mind shifted too, memory sharpening into something uncomfortably exact, thoughts accelerating, instincts forming around angles and trajectories and force. We did not speak. We were not encouraged to. We weren't punished for silence. Silence was simply the only shape life took here. We didn't have names either. Only designations. I became Candidate 7. Somewhere in the fog of that earlier life, I had once been a boy with a family name, a history, a tiny private hope. That boy started to feel like a story I'd been told about someone else. Eventually, only 8 of us remained. One cycle, we were led into a new chamber, larger than the rest. The walls displayed ancient weapons like museum pieces, relics kept close not for admiration, but for readiness. At the center stood 3 custodians in full battle plate, guardian spears held at ease. Arakan observed from the side. "You have been remade," he said. "Your bodies purified, your minds shaped. Now you will be measured in true combat." The custodians lifted their spears in perfect unison. "You will attack as a unit," Arakan continued. "You will fight until you cannot stand. Those who show courage and tactical sense will proceed. Those who do not will be repurposed." No horn sounded, no signal was given. One instant we stood braced in dread. The next we surged forward as if pulled by a shared string. We moved together. We had never coordinated, never spoken plans, never practiced formations as a team. Yet our bodies and minds aligned into a single, coherent assault. Another modification revealed, not merely strength, but synchronization. The custodians held back. That much was obvious. And even restrained, they made us look like children playing at war. Their spears traced arcs too fast to follow. They parried with effortless grace, countered with strikes that punished without crippling, testing, not murdering. We couldn't touch them, we couldn't even come close, but the goal was never victory. It was revelation. Hours blurred. Sweat and shock and exhaustion layered over each other. Then one of us, Candidate 3, broke the unit. He lunged alone, reckless with desperation or pride, trying to stand out. The custodian he targeted stepped aside as if bored. A spear half-snapped across Candidate 3's chest. The impact launched him backward into the wall with a crack that made my teeth ache. He didn't rise. We adjusted without speaking. Patterns shifted. Angles changed. We kept coming, because that's what we had been rebuilt to do. Continue. Exhaustion eventually tore the cohesion apart. One by one, candidates faltered, bodies finally reaching the edge of what had been engineered into them. In the end, only 3 of us remained upright when Arakan finally called a halt. Servitors entered and began collecting the others, dragging them away like broken tools. I did not ask where they were taken. I did not allow myself the luxury of wondering. "The final phase awaits," Arakan said. "You 3 have shown sufficient potential." He looked at us the way a craftsman looks at material that has survived the first hammering. "Now you will be unmade and reforged one last time." The pods prepared for us were different, larger, more complex, surrounded by humming machines whose purpose my altered mind could not fully translate. As I stepped into mine, I caught a glimpse of one of the other survivors through the narrowing aperture. In his eyes, I saw what I felt in myself. Not fear. Fear had been burned out long ago, but a question too deep to say aloud. After this, what will be left? The pod sealed. Darkness fell. And when I woke, there was no pain. The absence of it was so profound, it felt like silence after a lifetime of screaming. A stillness settled through my mind as if some constant background noise had finally been switched off. Warm light filtered down from a vaulted ceiling. I lay on marble, unrestrained. When I sat up, my body moved with a fluid grace that felt both new and inevitable, alien, yet perfectly fitted, like armor that had finally found the correct wearer. Shield Captain Arakan stood before me. He had not changed, but I had. I saw him differently. not as a towering nightmare or distant icon, but as something closer to my own nature, not equal in experience, not equal in knowledge, but of the same crafted lineage. His gaze measured me. Then, with the calm certainty of a verdict, he spoke. "Rise," he said. "Custodian." And I rose, becoming aware, with a quiet finality, of how much larger the world had become, and how much smaller my old life truly was. When I stood, I realized the boy I had been would have come up to my chest. My frame had been rebuilt into something magnificent and unnerving, height, breadth, density, all recalculated. Power rolled under skin that carried a faint, warm sheen, like gold dust trapped beneath the surface. Every sense arrived sharpened. Air currents, distant vibrations, the soft electrical murmur of devices hidden behind meters of stone. The world didn't feel louder, it felt clearer. Shield Captain Arakan studied me for a long moment. "You are the last," he said. "No ceremony, no flourish. Just a statement of inventory. The others broke in the final measures. Their material has been reclaimed for future attempts. You alone endured the full ascent." I understood what he meant without asking. 26 boys reduced to components, reused, redirected, made useful in death because they had failed to be useful in life. I assumed I should feel something: victory, relief, pride, even grief. Instead, there was only a quiet acceptance, cold as polished stone. This had never been a contest I'd won. It was selection through pressure. A sculptor's chisel striking again and again until only the piece that didn't fracture remained. Arakan turned. "The last benediction comes now. Your panoply waits in the chamber reserved for those who pass. Before it is placed upon you, you must sever the final tie." He led me through corridors that my new perceptions both recognized and reinterpreted. I'd walked these roads as a child, blind, exhausted, afraid. Now I heard the palace breathing, the deep, ancient machines in the walls, the faint hiss of climate systems, the distant cadence of footsteps far beyond human hearing. At crossings, other custodians stood like statues brought to life. Each gave a slight inclination as we passed, acknowledging Arakan's authority, not my existence. That was fair. I had been declared something, but I had not yet been counted. We reached a small circular room with nothing in it but a single object set at the center, a plain wooden box. It looked almost out of place in the palace's relentless permanence. Old, scarred, handled by hands across centuries. Carved markings ran along the lid. To my surprise, I could read them now. Renunciation, offering, self-abandonment in service of a higher will. "Open it," Arakan said. I stepped forward and lifted the lid. Inside lay 2 items, a strip of parchment and a ceremonial knife with a gilded hilt. Simple, austere, the kind of ritual tool that existed to make a point rather than to impress. "Write your name," Arakan instructed. "The last time it will ever be recorded by your own hand." The words didn't strike like a threat. They landed like a door closing. I took the knife. It balanced perfectly in my altered grip. I pricked my finger and watched the blood gather, darker than it should have been, thicker, almost reluctant to fall. Another quiet confirmation of how far from human I had already traveled. I wrote the name I'd once defended with childish pride. Derek Vaughan. Even as the letters formed, they felt like a label on an artifact in a museum, accurate, historically interesting, emotionally distant. Arakan produced a small brazier, already hot, coals glowing with a tight, intense heat that smelled of sanctified oils. "Burn it." I laid the parchment on the coals. The edges curled immediately. The ink-black letters warped, then vanished as flame ate through the fibers. Smoke rose in a thin, solemn thread. As the last corner crumbled into ember, something inside me unclenched. Not pain, not grief. Release. Like a cable cut clean, no fraying, no struggle, just separation. Arakan's voice was quiet, almost formal. "From this moment, you are nameless. You are a custodian of the Emperor. His protection is your single purpose. All else is noise. He placed a hand on my shoulder. It was the first touch that wasn't restraint, examination, or correction. It wasn't warmth, exactly, but it was recognition, a signal that I had crossed a line. In time, he continued, you will earn a designation among the 10,000. It will not be the thing you surrendered. That belonged to a mortal child who no longer exists. We moved onward into the Chamber of Ascension, a vast round space ringed with candles and shadow, a place that felt less like an armory and more like a sanctum. At its center, on a raised dais, waited my armor. Not the full war panoply I'd glimpsed in my earliest days here, but a simpler pattern, still magnificent, still lethal, built for watchfulness in the palace's innermost rings. Sentinel plate. I knew the term without knowing where I'd learned it. Knowledge sat in my mind like etched metal, planted and secured. Pale-robed artisans, tech priests or something adjacent, approached in silence. The ritual began. Piece by piece, aura might locked onto my body with a precision that felt less like dressing and more like completion. Each segment met my new dimensions as if it had been waiting for this exact shape. The armor didn't sit atop me. It integrated, sealing and balancing, distributing weight so perfectly it became an extension of my posture and intent. When the final clasp secured, I stood in gold beneath candlelight like a statue that had learned to move. Arakan approached carrying a guardian spear, a real one, not a training rod, not a controlled pain delivery instrument, an ancient weapon with purpose layered into it. He held it out. This is solemnity, he said, and if there was any sentiment in him, it lived only in the reverence of that name. 17 have borne it before you. Each died in the Emperor's service. He fixed his gaze on me. You will be the 18th. Serve as they served, without hesitation. I accepted the spear. It rested in my hands with the same sense of inevitability as the armor had. Balanced. Correct, as though I'd been missing it. Arakan nodded once. Your first station is the Sanctuary of Whispered Names, appropriate for one who has just surrendered his own. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. You will hold vigil for 100 hours. No relief, no movement, no speech. This is not a test of strength or skill. It is a test of devotion. We went deeper, down endless steps, through layers of barriers. I could feel more than see. Fields, locks, seals that would have defied armies. At last we reached an archway leading into a long, narrow hall. At the far end stood a plain, dark wooden door, unmarked, unadorned, almost insultingly simple after all the palace's grandeur. Beyond that door, Arakan said, is the sanctuary. None may enter, save the Emperor himself should he ever rise, or a shield captain under the rites of the Feast of Blades. His gaze hardened. No rank, no title, no pleading, no exceptions. He stepped back as if placing me into the geometry of the palace. Many break here. The flesh can be trained, the mind can be shaped, but solitude finds what remains untested. Some cannot endure silence. They fracture. They are repurposed. I took my position before the door. I planted the haft of solemnity upon the stone. I assumed the stance I'd observed 1,000 times in passing, the posture of a guard who is not waiting, not hoping, not reacting. Simply present. The Emperor protects, Arakan said, turning to leave. The Emperor protects, I replied. My voice was deeper than I remembered. Resonant, controlled. Then I let silence close over my tongue like a vow. His footsteps faded into distance. The hall became my world. Hours passed. I didn't shift. I didn't blink more than necessary. My enhanced physiology needed nothing it once demanded. No food, no water, no rest. The vigil, measured in hours, was a small thing to a body designed for long stillness. The palace spoke in subtleties, distant footfalls traveling through stone, the low, constant hum of hidden machinery, air whispering through vents like a suppressed breath. Nothing came close. I reviewed my journey without emotion, as though reading a report. Foundation first. Genetic restructuring, the bedrock upon which everything else had been built. Then conditioning. Not crude indoctrination, but surgical rewriting. Pathways strengthened, others starved and severed. Doubt stripped away like unwanted tissue. Compassion narrowed and aimed, not eliminated but focused into a single beam. Protect the Emperor, protect the palace, protect the purpose. The physical changes were immense, yet simple in concept. Grafts, reinforcements, implants, replacements. The true transformation was the removal of unnecessary self. Choice was the first thing to die. At the 70th hour, I detected approaching steps. Too light for a custodian, too measured for a servitor. Not hurried, not afraid. A robed figure appeared at the far end of the hall, walking slowly, as if time itself owed her deference. When she came closer, I saw an ancient woman, skin lined by centuries, hands thin and steady, eyes sharp as blades. She stopped several paces away and looked up at me like one might examine a newly forged weapon. "So," she said, voice stronger than her body suggested. "You are the newest." I remained still. "Orders were orders," she chuckled softly. "Disciplined. Good. I am Amalia, keeper of the Sanctum archives. I've catalogued the inductions for 3 millennia. I've watched many stand where you stand." She stepped closer, gaze searching my face. "You have the look the successful ones carry. Distance. As if the person you used to be is across a canyon you no longer feel compelled to cross." Her eyes narrowed with something like approval. Then abruptly, she changed tone. "I am authorized to enter. Step aside and allow passage." I did not move. Silence stretched. Then Amalia nodded once, satisfied. "Excellent. You'd be amazed how many fail right here. Authority is a sweet poison, especially when it speaks with an old voice and wears the mask of reason." She turned away, already losing interest like a teacher closing a book. "You'll do well," she said over her shoulder. "Remember this when a greater temptation comes. This won't be your last test." Her footsteps retreated. The hall returned to quiet. Whether she had been a genuine procedural trial or merely an ancient archivist enjoying her tradition didn't matter. My function remained unchanged. The remaining hours passed like stone settling. When Arakan returned, exactly 100 hours after he had left, I had not shifted a fraction. "Vigil complete," he said. "You are accepted." I rose from the stance with smooth control. No stiffness, no fatigue. "You encountered Amalia," he added, not as a question. "Yes, Shield Captain. She tests every new custodian," Arakan said. "Some call it unorthodox. I call it effective. She found a flaw in your predecessor that our methods did not." There was finality in the word that followed. "He was repurposed. I did not ask how. I did not need to." Arakan gestured for me to follow. "You will be assigned to the outer Hegaimon squadrons. You will learn the practical burdens of our duty beside veterans who have watched the Imperium rot in slow motion and still held the line." As we walked, he spoke of shield companies and their philosophies, of rotations from outer rings to inner sanctums, of private disciplines and rituals that bound the custodians into something tighter than an army. A single, unyielding will expressed through many bodies. I absorbed every word with perfect recall. One question formed anyway, and when Arakan paused, I allowed it to exist aloud. "Shield Captain, what purpose does the Sanctuary of Whispered Names serve?" He stopped, looked at me in a way that measured whether curiosity was weakness or simply precision-seeking context. Then he answered, "It preserves what we surrender. Names written in blood and sealed away. Some claim that if the Emperor rises, he will speak them aloud and return what was set aside." He resumed walking, armor catching light from old glow globes. "For some, that story is comfort. For me, it is unnecessary." His tone sharpened slightly. We are what we are made into, not what we once were. We entered a vast training chamber where dozens of custodians moved in controlled silence. Spears whirled in patterns refined over millennia. Auramite flashed. Metal rang. Breathing, steady, measured, was the only rhythm. These are your brothers, Arakan said. Not by blood, by purpose. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Formal acceptance, not affection. You have no name, but you have an identity. One of the 10,000, the Watchers, the wall that does not crack. Then he left me among them. I stepped into an empty practice circle and raised solemnity in salute to the custodian who approached as my first sparring partner. He returned the gesture with an impassive nod. When our spears met, clean, precise, without hatred, I felt the last faint residue of the child's story loosen and drift away. Derek Vaughan became what he truly was. Ash on a burned parchment, sealed in a quiet place few would ever see. What stood here instead was gold and duty. Perfect loyalty shaped into human form, a guardian who would outlive everyone who might have mourned the boy, and who no longer possessed the part of himself that could mourn. That is the truth of becoming a custodian. Not glory, not triumph, not even sacrifice. Because sacrifice suggests choice. We are taken before we understand. Remade before we can refuse. And by the time we recognize the full weight of what was traded away, we no longer have the human machinery required to grieve it. In the final phase of my rebirth, knowledge had been planted directly into the architecture of my mind. I carried the history of the 10,000 like scripture engraved into bone. Names and deeds of those long gone, heroes and failures alike, all of them once children, all of them once certain they were being chosen for honor, and all of them in the end, chosen for something far simpler, to stand, to watch, to never move when the world begs you to. I carried the palace inside my head like a second skeleton. Its measurements, its turns, its dead ends and hidden arteries, every span and angle sat in memory with perfect clarity. I could have crossed the inner labyrinth sightless, guided by air pressure, resonance, and the faint tremor of machinery behind stone. I also carried other knowledge. Countless disciplines of violence, the mechanics of blades and pole arms, the mathematics of impact and leverage, the calm procedures by which a life can be ended with the least waste of motion. What I could not hold anymore, what no longer fit inside the architecture of my remade mind, was the small warmth of being human. A name spoken gently, a familiar voice, the ease of belonging to something intimate and imperfect. Those concepts had become as unreachable as a color the eye was never built to see. I understood the words intellectually, the way a scholar understands a dead language, but there was no corresponding sensation in me to answer them. Time stopped feeling like time. Days became a single, continuous duty. Years became a kind of weather. Present, inevitable, barely worth measuring. I served first in the outer hegemon squadrons, then under other rotations and cadres whose titles blurred into function. I stood over vaults that were not listed on any chart, places where relic weapons slept behind seals known to a handful of living minds. I escorted the highest-ranking tech adepts into sanctified chambers where they performed their rites on the hidden engines that kept means and miracles aligned. Machines that sustained the Emperor's failing flesh against entropy itself. I walked spaces that most people did not know existed. Hollow passages between walls, ancient maintenance tunnels that had not felt an unaugmented footstep since the age of betrayal. In those silent routes, the palace felt less like a fortress and more like a living monument, old, patient, and endlessly watchful. In my 207th year, the Order finally marked me with a designation. I had been posted to a corridor called the Gallery of Glass, a long, austere hall where stasis fields held thousands of crystal works. Each sculpture captured a single moment of Imperial history: triumph, catastrophe, oath, murder, coronation, exile. Artisans long dead had poured their lives into frozen scenes, and the palace preserved them as it preserved everything, without mercy, without decay. For 3 years I stood there without motion, without deviation, so still I might have been another exhibit. Then a custodian of the companions approached, one of the most honored, those whose vigil lay closest to the throne. He stopped before me and spoke with the weight of someone carrying another's authority. "A report of your service was placed before the Master of Mankind," he said. "Your stillness was noted, your attention recorded." He studied me as though he were reading the surface of a blade for flaws. "In his judgment, you are designated Epimetheus, for an ancient figure said to possess perfect clarity in hindsight. I accepted it as I accepted all things, without visible reaction. A designation was useful, nothing more than a necessary distinction among brothers forged into near identical perfection. And yet, deep beneath the engineered calm, something small flickered. Not joy, not pride, only a muted recognition that my existence, this long, silent function, had been seen by the one presence in the galaxy whose notice meant anything at all. The name settled onto me the way a final plate locks into place. I was no longer merely a nameless sentinel. I was Epimetheus of the Adeptus Custodes, recorded and assigned by the throne itself. Centuries continued their slow procession. Battle came rarely in that era. More often, I stood as an ornament of vigilance while power flowed around me. High lords rising and falling, factions coiling and uncoiling in the corridors like rival serpents. Wars raged across stars, too distant to see, reduced to data and astropathic bursts that passed beneath my guard on their way into the hands of rulers. None of it touched me. I observed the Imperium the way a natural philosopher might observe insects, interested, detached, faintly amused by the urgency of short-lived creatures. In my 5th century, I was assigned to a place few spoke of aloud, the Chamber of Echoes. A small circular room deep within the palace, built with an exactness that made sound behave unnaturally. Under precise conditions, resonance there could become more than resonance, patterns of vibration that strained reality's weave. It was said the Emperor had used it in earlier ages for workings too perilous to repeat. My duty was simple: keep the chamber uncontaminated. No unauthorized entry, no stray voices, no careless noise. I stood alone there for 50 years. In that time, I heard things the palace did not advertise. Whispers that slipped out of stone when distant tides aligned, faint voices with no lungs behind them. I saw brief apparitions form at the chamber's heart, silhouettes of beings that had once manifested there, echoes of experiments conducted when the galaxy was younger and less broken. I recorded each phenomenon and transmitted the reports up the chain of command to Shield Captain Dialesian, who had inherited Arakan's place after Arakan fell fighting a demonic incursion in the lower depths. It was in that perfect solitude that I experienced the closest thing to introspection my conditioning allowed. Not regret, not longing, but an awareness, clean, clinical, that some portions of my mind were fenced. I could perceive the barriers like walls seen in fog, artificial, deliberate, placed during my making. I could not cross them, could not even want to cross them. Yet I could acknowledge their presence. That awareness did not erode my loyalty. It refined it. I protected the Emperor not because I was a worshipper. Custodians of all his servants were the least likely to mistake mortality for divinity. I protected him because his broken, imperfect design for humanity was still the only coherent hope our species possessed in a galaxy eager to devour it. From my transhuman vantage, I could see the long shape of that vision more clearly than any mortal life could. When I was finally relieved from the Chamber of Echoes and returned for reassignment, Dialesian noticed the change at once. "The chamber has written itself into you, Epimetheus," he said, studying my face with eyes that had survived ages I knew only as recorded catastrophe. "Few endure that vigil. Fewer emerge sane." "I am uncompromised," I answered. My dedication is complete. I do not doubt your loyalty, he replied, but I recognize the gaze of one who has glimpsed beyond the veil. The Emperor wore such an expression after certain works. He consulted a data slate, glyphs shifting beneath his attention. At the request of the companions, you will be reassigned to the Sanctum Imperialis, outer ring of the throne room. There was no higher honor within our order, no heavier responsibility. I accepted without outward change, though that buried fragment, the faint remnant that still recognized significance, trembled at the implication. The throne room, the heart, the axis around which the Imperium turned. The Sanctum Imperialis was unlike any place I had guarded. The psychic pressure there was constant, an invisible mass pressing against perception. Ordinary minds would have shattered under it within moments. Golden light saturated the chamber, not from lamps or glow globes, but from the throne itself and the withered figure bound to it. Radiant, even in ruin, I did not look directly at the Emperor. None did, save the rare few permitted in audiences whose meaning transcended protocol. Instead, I fixed my gaze on my assigned sector, one piece of a vast defense geometry. At any moment, 200 custodians stood in place, each covering a precise arc, each a link in a living barrier. Time behaved strangely there. Watches stretched or compressed, bent by psychic tides that rose and fell from the throne. An interval that should have lasted hours sometimes passed like a breath. Other times, each second dragged, thick as resin, as if reality itself labored to remain intact. During one such suspended period, when the world felt paused mid-heartbeat, I heard something so faint even my hearing barely accepted it. A whisper, a name, Derek. I did not move. I did not react. Discipline held my body like iron. The Emperor had not spoken aloud in 10 millennia. And even if some miracle permitted it, why would he address a single custodian by a name surrendered centuries ago, burned to ash, sealed away in a sanctuary few could enter? The whisper came again, clearer, directed. Not a voice through air, something placed into my mind with impossible precision. It spoke the full name and followed it with a simple acknowledgement of function, as if marking a tally. My body remained still, but within the quiet machinery of my thoughts, urgency surged. Was it a test? A trap designed to catch a flaw? An attachment, a weakness, a crack? Then I felt the pressure behind it. The same immense presence that filled the chamber, the same weight that radiated from the throne. The source was unmistakable. Some fragment of the Emperor's shattered consciousness had cohered, briefly, into focus, and had reached into whatever metaphysical vault held what we surrendered, plucking my discarded identity out of eternity to touch me with recognition. I felt no pride, no joy. Those were tools I no longer possessed, but I felt something. A resonance, a profound rightness, as if a long equation had found balance for a single moment. Then the contact vanished. Time lurched forward again into its erratic flow. I continued my vigil without deviation. None of my brothers signaled any awareness that anything unusual had occurred. Whatever had happened, real or impossible, it had been meant for me alone. When my watch ended, I returned to my cell within the barracks. We did not sleep in communal halls like the Astartes. Each custodian had a private space, small, spare, sufficient. We required little rest. Most off-duty hours were spent in training, meditation, or study of ancient texts and accumulated doctrine. I sat upon stone and entered a contemplative state, not emptiness, but analysis. I reviewed the event as I would review a battlefield report. What did it mean? What response was required? Had others received similar contact and kept it private? No conclusion emerged. No action presented itself beyond the one constant: continue. If the Emperor, or what remained of him, willed further communication, it would come in its own time. My place was not to interpret, only to serve. Centuries passed. I fought when required. A brief, brutal uprising when rogue psychers attempted to fracture palace defenses through warpcraft and treachery. Later, an extended assignment beyond Terra's immediate heart during a conflict historians would eventually name and argue over. Through it all, the throne did not whisper again. The memory remained perfect, but it did not consume me. It simply existed, one singular, improbable moment in a life measured in long spans. I was Epimetheus. The boy's name belonged to history. Then came a holy day. The ecclesiarchy elevated some rediscovered saint, and the palace overflowed with pilgrims admitted into controlled public sections. Security thickened. Boundaries mattered more than ever. I was assigned to a grand arch that separated the pilgrim's route from a restricted corridor reserved for officials and clergy of high rank. My instruction was plain: allow only authorized passage. Use lethal force without hesitation against breach attempts. For hours, I stood unmoving while human currents flowed around me. Faces lifted in awe, whispered prayers, occasional prostration at a careful distance from the golden figure blocking their way. I registered them as environment, not threat, not concern, unless they tested the line. In the middle of the processional, I saw her, an elderly woman, spine bent by time, hands wrapped around a gnarled walking staff. A plain pilgrim's robe. No ornament save a small pendant that flashed when it caught the light. Her pace was slow, but her direction was unwavering. There was nothing remarkable about her among thousands, until something in her posture stirred a flicker in memory. A pattern, a cadence of movement, the kind of recognition that should have been impossible. She stopped directly before me and tilted her face up. Her pale eyes were clouded with age, but there was attention behind them, sharp, unwavering attention. She studied me for a long moment. Then she spoke so softly it was almost nothing, yet my hearing caught it clean. Derek Vaughan, not a question, a certainty. I did not respond. I could not. My training, my nature, my role, everything in me forbade acknowledgement of that name, especially spoken by a civilian in a public space. I kept my gaze fixed above her head, my spear held in perfect attention. And still she continued, voice strengthening as if deciding that fear no longer mattered. "Of course you don't remember me," she said. "Why would you? I was only one among many at the Schola. Sister Hela. I taught the little ones to read. You were mine for a time. Before they took you." Something moved inside me. Not emotion, not in the way a mortal would mean it. Yet a memory rose with startling clarity. A cramped classroom, worn desks, a woman with darker hair and straighter shoulders guiding a child's hand across parchment. A gentle voice in a place where gentleness had been rare. Her eyes searched my impassive face for any sign of recognition. "I knew it was you," she whispered. "Not by your face, you're changed beyond any human knowing, but your stillness. You had it even then. That watchfulness, that way of being present without needing to be seen." She swallowed, steadying herself on her staff. "I looked for you for decades," she said. "Whenever duty allowed. I walked what parts of the palace they permit us to see, hoping for even a glimpse. And now, at the end of my life, here you stand." Protocol suggested a simple action. Signal servitors, remove the disruption, preserve the boundary. Her words were inappropriate. Her approach was risky. She threatened the calm order of my post. And yet, I did not signal. I did not move. I remained exactly as I had been made to remain, an unyielding statue of duty, while the impossible sound of my discarded name hung in the air between us, like smoke that refused to disperse. A part of me I hadn't known still existed. Something buried so deep it should have been unreachable. Wanted to hear what she would say next. "I'm dying," the old woman said, as simply as announcing the weather. "Cancer. There's no cure for someone like me. Not at my age, not in my station." Her fingers moved to the pouch at her belt. With care that suggested ritual, she drew out a small book, thin, worn, its cover faded by years of handling. She held it up so the light caught the scuffed leather. "You made this," she said. I did not move. I did not lower my spear. I did not acknowledge the name she had spoken, but my eyes saw everything. "In my class," she continued, "you wrote stories about the Emperor's victories, the sort of tales they feed children, simple, shining, certain. Your handwriting was always so precise." She paused, as if tasting the weight of the next words. "I kept it when they took you. A remembrance. Not because it had value, but because you did." She knelt slowly, joints protesting, and placed the book on the stone at my feet. A deliberate offering, an impossible object in a place built to erase the past. "I don't expect you to speak to me," she said, straightening with effort. "I know what you've become. I know what was done to you." Her pale eyes searched my face for anything human and found only gold and stillness. "But I needed you to know this. Someone remembers Derek Vaughan. Not every trace of who you were has been scraped clean out of the universe." She drew a breath and spoke the old phrase, common on every world, uttered by pilgrims and generals alike. Yet in her mouth it became something else, a farewell, a blessing, a bridge thrown across a chasm. The Emperor protects. Protocol demanded silence. Discipline demanded immobility, and yet the words rose out of me before I could measure them, as if another voice had found its way through a seam I didn't know I had. "The Emperor protects," I answered. It did not sound like Epimetheus. It sounded like something older and smaller, like a child repeating a lesson he once believed in. Her eyes widened. A single tear carved a path down the maze of her wrinkled cheek. She nodded once, as if that was all she had come for, then turned and disappeared into the moving sea of pilgrims without looking back. I did not watch her go. I remained at my post, spear fixed, body unmoved, duty intact. But when the crowds thinned and the lights shifted toward night, when my watch ended and another of the 10,000 took my place, I returned to the archway and found the book still where she had left it, small and stubborn on the stone, like a dropped spark that refused to die. I picked it up. I slipped it into a concealed compartment in my armor where it would not be seen. A breach? Yes. Perhaps the first action I had taken in centuries that wasn't purely the result of order and procedure. In my private cell, I examined it beneath dim light. The pages were yellowed, fragile at the edges. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mine, from a lifetime so far away it might as well have belonged to another person. The stories were propaganda, clean narratives of victory and righteousness, the kind that teaches obedience by making obedience feel like hope. There was nothing inside worth preserving by any rational assessment, nothing that justified risk. And yet I did not destroy it. Instead, I hid it behind a loose stone, an imperfect flaw in the cell wall that only I had ever noticed, now turned into a secret cavity. The book was not a thing I intended to read often, not a shrine for sentiment. It was simply allowed to exist, a thin tether between Epimetheus and a boy whose name had been burned to ash. A reminder that even the most complete transformation begins with something that came before. The next day, I reported to Shield Captain Dionysian. I confessed. I gave a full account. The civilian, the surrendered name, my response, the artifact. I offered myself for evaluation and, if required, repurposing. It was the only path consistent with my training. Dionysian listened without interruption. When I finished, he let silence settle for a long time, as if consulting something deeper than protocol. Finally, he spoke. "You spoke to a civilian who addressed you by your surrendered name. You answered. You retained an object tied to your former identity. Those are severe breaches." "Yes, Shield Captain," I said. "I offer no defense." His gaze sharpened, not hostile, diagnostic. "The Emperor spoke to you once," he said. "In the throne room. He used that name." My stillness fractured for a heartbeat. "How do you know?" "Because it has happened before," Dionysian replied. "Rarely, centuries apart, but the pattern repeats. A moment of recognition, a surrendered name spoken into a single mind." He moved to a viewing port and looked out across the palace's vastness, like a man staring at the body of a sleeping titan. We do not record these incidents. We do not discuss them, yet they occur. He turned back to me, expression grave rather than condemning. Your reaction to the woman was not a failure of will. It was a consequence. The Emperor's earlier acknowledgement created a seam in your conditioning, small but real. It allowed a second event to hook into what should have been unreachable. I processed that the way I processed all things, calmly reorganizing the architecture of explanation. Am I to be repurposed? I asked. No, he said. You will be reassigned. There is duty for which you are now uniquely suited because of what has occurred. He activated a hololithic display. A chamber appeared, circular, unfamiliar, lined with countless niches like small alcoves in a crypt. The menagerie of identity, he said. A repository. Memories extracted from custodians who have experienced similar contact. A precaution against the vulnerability you have demonstrated. I understood the logic instantly. You will undergo a procedure, Dionysian continued, to remove the clusters connected to your former identity, including the encounter. The extracted record will be preserved within the menagerie, accessible only to the Captain General and Shield Captains under necessity. The solution should have felt like relief, returning me to the pure clarity I had existed within for centuries. Instead, something unfamiliar rose in me. Resistance, not disobedience, not refusal, reluctance. The book, I said, hearing the words as if someone else had placed them in my mouth. What of it? It will be destroyed, Dionysian replied without hesitation. No physical traces can remain, but its memory will be contained, nothing truly lost, only secured where it cannot compromise function. I nodded, because agreement was correct. And yet, beneath correctness, a hollow opened, an awareness of impending loss that wasn't logical. For the first time since my making, the future carried something that resembled regret. The procedure was scheduled for the following morning. That night I returned to my cell to prepare. I sat on the stone and attempted the familiar disciplines of clarity. They would not come. My thoughts looped. The old woman's face, the weight of the book, the whisper from the throne long ago. All of it circling like a muted alarm. In the dark hours before dawn, I made a decision no conditioning should have permitted. I retrieved the book. I handled it the way one might handle a relic, precise, reverent, almost absurdly careful. I opened to the final page where the child's hand had signed the name in deliberate strokes, and beneath it a location, Schola Progenium Terra. I tore that page out, folded it, slipped it into a specialized compartment within my armor, space intended for field stims or emergency seals. Then I destroyed the rest of the book, page by page, shredded, disposed of through reclamation, evidence erased. The act felt surgical, like amputation performed with clean tools. When it was done, I returned to meditation and found that I could finally reach the required state. Calm, prepared, ready to be cut open again. At the appointed time, I reported to the chamber. Unmarked tech adepts waited there, robes plain, faces hidden behind smooth masks. Dionysian stood as witness and safeguard. Disarm, disrobe, the lead adept instructed. Voice a synthetic imitation of human tone. Assume position. I removed my armor with practiced efficiency, setting each plate exactly where it was meant to rest. I kept only the smallest component, what I had hidden, palmed in my hand as I lay upon the surgical dais. Servitor arms extended from the ceiling bearing instruments both familiar and unsettlingly esoteric. A neural crown was lowered onto my head, its connections finding the ports installed in me centuries ago. This extraction targets specific clusters, the adept explained while adjusting controls. Disorientation will occur. Gaps may present. Stabilization within 3 days. Pain minimal. I regulated my breathing. The folded page pressed against my palm like heat. Initiating sequence, the adept announced. Subject designation, Epimetheus. Confirm readiness. I am prepared, I replied. Impulse patterns lit my cortex with cold precision. I felt boundaries softening, memories becoming fluid, neural pathways loosening from their anchors as if being carefully teased apart. It wasn't pain. It was something stranger, the awareness of absence approaching. The sensation of self being made smaller by design. Then, through the clinical surge, another presence brushed my thoughts. Warm, vast, familiar in pressure, a whisper without sound. Preserve what matters. And then the name again, placed into my mind like a fingertip against glass. I could not tell if it was the Emperor, a reflex of the neural interface, or my own mind screaming into its own silence. It did not matter. The message rang true anyway. As the extraction progressed and memories slid away like water through cupped hands, I made one last choice. I focused my will on a single image, a small worn book and an aged face. I built a fortress around it, drawing on techniques custodians used to resist psychic intrusion. Not to defy the procedure entirely, that was impossible, but to protect one core fragment from being lifted out. I let the rest go. Origins, context, the full narrative, all of it stripped away into the menagerie. But that one island, small, stubborn, remained. The crown powered down. Connections withdrew. Servitors retracted like spiders returning to their nests. The tech adepts ran final scans and reported success. Dialesian reviewed the results. Expression unreadable. The procedure appears complete, he said at last. Armor yourself. Report at dawn for new assignment. I rose with smooth control despite lingering disorientation. I could feel the gaps. Clean excisions in my mind, absences with sharp edges. Yet the core I had protected remained. A tiny continuity embedded where it could not easily be reached. As I redonned my armor, plate by plate, I palmed the hidden page again and slipped it back into its compartment. I could not have explained why. The context was gone. The reasoning dissolved. The emotional vocabulary had never been mine to begin with. I only knew, wordlessly, certainly, that it mattered. At dawn, I reported to the assignment chamber. Dialesian waited with another custodian whose armor bore markings I recognized at once. The Shadow Keepers, wardens of the dark cells and their unspeakable contents. Epimetheus, Dialesian said, you are reassigned to the Shadow Keeper Shield Company, effective immediately. You will serve under Shield Captain Navradaran. Navradaran's voice was deep, measured. The journey to the dark cells is long. The paths are not known to most. Prepare for a vigil unlike any you have endured. I collected solemnity. The spear settled into my grip with familiar correctness. Whatever had been removed, whatever had been sealed away, I remained what I had been made to be, a custodian. Eternal duty. Absolute dedication. If I carried something else, a small echo of a boy, a scrap of handwriting folded and hidden, it would remain contained. It would not compromise function. As I followed Navradaran to the threshold, Dialesian's voice stopped me. The Emperor protects Epimetheus. I turned. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw understanding in his ancient gaze, as if he knew exactly what I had preserved and chose, deliberately, not to force it into the light. The Emperor protects, I replied. Then I was gone, descending into depths where geometry twisted and time misbehaved. In the millennia that followed, I stood before doors that held horrors too dangerous to destroy and too perilous to release. The dark cells did not obey ordinary space. Corridors folded in ways that strained even enhanced perception. Time there compressed into razor focus, then stretched into subjective eternities. Custodians rotated through duty beside me. Faces becoming familiar, then receding into memory as they were reassigned or, rarely, lost to breaches and battles in the deep. Through it all, the fragment remained, not fading, not intruding, simply existing. And on rare occasions, When standing before cells that held entities which attacked the mind rather than flesh, I would feel that hidden kernel pulse with sudden force, as if the psychic pressure of the prisoners pressed against it, and found something unexpectedly alive. In the rare moments when the dark cells pressed their thoughts against mine, when something inside the cages probed for a seam, a doubt, a hunger, I understood why Dionysian had sent me there. Most of my brothers were built like flawless walls. I was a wall with one sealed doorway in it. And that door, paradoxically, made the wall stronger against certain kinds of intrusion. The fragment I carried, small, stubborn, half-buried, became an anchor. When the prisoners tried to unmake me by pulling on emptiness, they found something with weight, something that refused to be rearranged. It did not make me less custodian. It made me harder to erase. 3,000 years passed. Commanders rose and fell, including Navradaran, dead in a brief, violent incursion that spilled warp fire into places that should never have known it. His successors were younger in years, not in gravity. The dark cells continued. The corridors continued their impossible angles. Time continued to behave as if it resented being measured. Then, without warning, routine broke. I was summoned from the dark cells to the sanctum of the Captain General himself. It was unprecedented in my experience. So sharp a change it caused a momentary disturbance in the perfect equilibrium of my existence. The journey upward took days, following routes so hidden they were known only to custodians and the palace's oldest mechanisms. Each passage felt like moving through layers of the world, rising from a deep ocean toward air. When I reached the ornate doors of the Captain General's sanctum, I felt tension, anticipation, a sensation that had no place in the regulated machinery of a custodian mind. I labeled it as a byproduct of long exposure to the dark cell's psychic emanations and attempted to dismiss it. It remained. The sanctum beyond was austere grandeur, walls lined with relic arms and armor from across 10,000 years, history rendered into metal, each piece carrying the silence of 1,000 deaths. A single viewport looked down onto Terra's barren surface far below, a rare view of the world we guarded. The Captain General stood with his back to me, unarmored, wearing only a robe of Imperial crimson. Yet there was no mistaking what he was. The transhuman physique, the density of presence, the sense of controlled force that made a room feel smaller. When he turned, recognition landed immediately despite the fact we had never met. Trajanis, Captain General for nearly a millennium, spoken of within the 10,000 with the same careful reverence used for ancient weapons. He regarded me without theatrics. Epimetheus, he said, and my designation sounded different in his mouth. Not warmer, but heavier, as if the name carried a ledger of centuries. Your record is exemplary. 3,000 years without incident. Few maintain such consistency even among us. I remained at attention, spear held in formal rest, awaiting the next line, the assignment, the judgment, the purpose of this rupture in routine. You are relieved of duties with the Shadow Keepers, he continued. Effective immediately. Then he added the second blow. You will join my personal guard. The Captain General's guard was not a posting. It was culmination, a place for veterans whose service had been measured beyond doubt. I understood the honor in the abstract, the way a diagram understands the shape of a mountain. I am humbled by your trust, Captain General, I said. I will serve with all that I am. Valoris nodded once. His eyes carried a long patience, the kind earned by watching the Imperium decay slowly while still holding it together by force of discipline. There is another matter, he said, moving to a data terminal embedded in a marble pedestal. One that concerns you, specifically. He paused, and then, with calm precision, he spoke the name that should have been Ash. Derek Vaughan. The sound struck the hidden core inside me like a hammer on a bell. That folded scrap I had preserved, what I could no longer fully contextualize yet could never let go, flared in my awareness. I did not move. I did not show it. But inside, shock bloomed, raw, sharp, unmistakably human. an emotion I had believed unreachable. "You are surprised," Valoris observed. "Good. That confirms what the records implied." He activated the terminal. A hololithic image sprang into the air between us. A torn page, yellowed at the edges, with a child's careful handwriting. My handwriting. My surrendered name, in the place of my origin. "This was found inside your armor during standard maintenance," Valoris said. 50 years ago, I said nothing. There was nothing to argue. The breach was plain, the artifact undeniable. "By protocol," Valoris continued, "you should have been repurposed immediately. Shield Captain Veritar requested exactly that." He looked at me, calm as a judge who has already decided. I denied his request. The implications did not fit cleanly into my understanding of Custodian discipline. The Captain General had intervened. The Captain General had chosen not to erase me. "Do you know why?" he asked, tone suggesting he expected no answer. "No, Captain General." Valoris deactivated the hololith. The page vanished like a ghost dismissed. He crossed to a weapons rack and lifted an ancient Guardian spear. Its design carried subtleties modern patterns did not. Older lines, older intent. "This belonged to Constantine Valdor," he said softly. "The first Captain General." He handled it with a reverence that was not worship, but acknowledgement of foundation. "There is an oral tradition," Valoris continued, "passed from Captain General to successor. Not recorded, not spoken outside this office." He replaced the spear carefully. "It says Valdor retained full memory of his life before transformation, that the Emperor ordered his conditioning to be partial, preserving something of what he had been, even as he was remade into the greatest of our kind." Valoris faced me again. "I cannot prove the story true, but I have come to believe it points at something essential." Then he did something that broke another layer of expectation. He gestured for me to stand beside him at the viewport. Not behind him. Equality. Unprecedented. "We are not the Astartes," he said, gazing down at Terra. "We are not mass-forged weapons. Each custodian is a single, handcrafted creation. A child is taken and transformed into something beyond human." He turned to me. "That individuality, our specificity, is central to our function, and complete erasure of identity may not be ideal." He let the thought hang, heavy but controlled. "A fragment, carefully preserved and contained, may serve a purpose the Emperor foresaw, even if we cannot fully comprehend it. Your case is not the first." I felt the world shift, not physically, but in the structure of meaning. My preservations of the page, the stubborn fragment of self I had shielded through extraction. It might not have been defiance. It might have been alignment, a pattern, a design. "The Emperor spoke to you once," Valoris said. "Not a question. Called you by that surrendered name." "Yes, Captain General," I confirmed, "during my watch in the Sanctum Imperialis." Valoris nodded as if confirming a private theory. "There are others," he said, "scattered through our ranks. Few, perhaps 1 in 1,000, but consistent across millennia. That suggests purpose." He returned to the pedestal and retrieved a small item he had kept out of sight until now. His fist opened. It was not a projection this time. It was the actual torn page, preserved despite its age, protected as carefully as any relic weapon. "This belongs to you," Valoris said, offering it to me. Not to the designation Epimetheus alone, but to what lies deeper, to what the Emperor recognized. He held my gaze. "I return it, not as contraband to be hidden, but as a sanctioned element of your identity." I accepted it with steady hands. And in that moment, something complex moved through me, too intricate for the simple categories my conditioning preferred. Not joy, not relief, recognition, a sense of wholeness, of two truths no longer at war. "You will not be wiped again," Valoris said, "and you will not speak of this to any, save myself or my successors. This remains a secret held only by those who must carry it." He placed a hand on my shoulder, formal, and yet somehow personal, in a way that made my mind hesitate, searching for a label it did not possess. "Guard this knowledge," Valorous said, "as carefully as you guard the Emperor. It may be equally valuable in the millennium ahead." That night I returned to my quarters with the page secured within my armor again. This time, openly, by the explicit sanction of the Captain General. When I meditated, the preserved fragment stirred differently. No longer a sealed ember in the deepest recess, but something allowed to warm the edges of awareness. Memories surfaced with cleaner shape. Sister Hella's kindness in a harsh classroom, a small book made with careful effort, the moment of selection, pride braided with fear. These recollections did not weaken me. They did not draw me from duty. They gave duty context. They reminded me what humanity actually was. Not as a sermon, not as an abstract species-wide concept, but as a single small life, measured in kindness and ink and a teacher's patience. In the centuries that followed, I served in the Captain General's Guard with the same precision that had carried me through every posting. I stood in wars that would later be named and sung. I held gates, watched councils, bled when necessary, and returned always to stillness. To the outside eye, nothing changed, but inside, something had been integrated. I remained Epimetheus, golden, immortal, perfect in function. And in some small, sanctioned, carefully contained way, I was still Derek Vaughan. Not as a rival identity, not as a weakness, but as a foundation stone. A continuity line running through millennia. On rare occasions during solemn rites, I would catch Valorous watching me, not with suspicion, but with thoughtful assessment, as if my continued excellence validated a belief he had carried in silence for a long time. We never spoke of it again. The subject was too dangerous for casual language. But there was understanding. And in my fourth millennium, in a hall where the names of fallen custodians were carved into golden marble, I experienced something unprecedented. Not tactical satisfaction, not the abstract calm of duty completed. Something human. Gratitude. Gratitude for the fragment preserved. For the wisdom that recognized it as purpose rather than flaw. For an emperor who, in designs too vast for ordinary minds, may have intended us not as perfect, unfeeling automatons, but as conscious guardians carrying within us a trace of what we were sworn to protect. I understood then what it meant to be custodian, not merely to be remade, but to be preserved in the remaking, to exist between, beyond human frailty, beyond transhuman coldness, holding the strengths of both without being owned by either. I am Epimetheus of the Adeptus Custodes. I stand eternal vigil. My service has no end. And somewhere within, anchored by a torn page and a remembered kindness, a child of terror still exists, not to weaken me, but to remind me what duty is for, what protection means, and why it matters.